Half-Life Echoes. It's a mod that's been getting a lot of attention over the last few days, and for valid reason. It's good enough to put itself in contention for Mod of the Year, and is so good that it'll be instantly considered a Half-Life mod classic, like Poke646 in Point of View. As you can imagine, one of the most common comments I get on both YouTube and Twitch is someone saying, "Play insert game here," which has always amused me because it's not phrased in a way that's saying, "Hey, can you please play this game?" It's literally a demand, "Play this game." Which, pro tip, if you want me to play a game, phrasing it as a demand is probably not the best. I know that's not what's intended, but that's generally how it comes out. With that said, I get so many of these comments about so many different games that I generally don't pay attention to them, unless I get a bunch of people all requesting me to play one game or one mod, and that was the case for Half-Life Echoes. But why did so many people want me to play this mod, and why did I say it's instantly going to become a Half-Life mod classic? Rating the graphics of a mod is somewhat difficult, especially in this case because Half-Life 1 came out 20 years ago. Yeah, you heard that right. People that are 18 were born 2 years after Half-Life 1 came out, which blows my mind. So obviously this mod is not going to look as good as games that come out today, so we're not going to rate it that way. Instead, we're going to compare it to the original Half-Life. And in that regard, surprisingly, it looks better. Half-Life 1 was a very claustrophobic game, and that was intentional. There's not many big open areas, and the few big open areas are kind of simple. That's not the case when it comes to Half-Life Echoes. There's a lot of big open areas, and of course there's a lot of claustrophobic areas as well, but that plays into the gameplay, which I'll talk about later. Instead, there's a bunch of attention to detail. Black Mesa looks a lot better in this mod than it did in Half-Life 1. In Half-Life 1, you have these steel gray corridors everywhere, and really, if I worked in Black Mesa, I would just feel so depressed. I mean, just look at it. Instead, with Half-Life Echoes, you get giant lobbies with ponds and some waterfalls, and it just looks nice. I would dare to say that there's actually more world building in Black Mesa and Half-Life Echoes than in the base game. Now, Echoes didn't redo the texture work entirely from Half-Life 1, it just took what Half-Life 1 did and made it look better. It's, again, not comparable to games that came out today, 20 years later after the base game, but still, for a mod and for what it does, it looks fantastic.
Hello? Can anyone hear me? Those things, they're everywhere. We've got to get out of here! Did you hear that? No! No! No!
The story of Half-Life Echoes is very simple yet brilliant in the same way. It doesn't conflict with anything Half-Life 1 did, and simply adds on top of it. In fact, if this mod came out 18 years ago, Valve might have picked it up as an official expansion for Half-Life 1. If you played Half-Life 1 and understand what's going on with the Resonance Cascade, then this is going to make a lot of sense to you and is simply going to add one more character to the plot. You play as someone named Candidate 12, another Black Mesa employee during the Resonance Cascade. Ordinarily, with Half-Life mods, this is where everything would end. Just survive until the end. But in this case, that's only half true. As your name, Candidate 12, implies, you are another person that G-Man is looking at. But there is another figure that is interfering with G-Man's plans. This opposing force to G-Man takes physical representation as Kingpin, a cut Half-Life 1 enemy. And throughout the game, you're going to be following this bright orange crystal. It's clear there are two sides watching you and tugging at you. From here, I'll let you play and figure this out on your own, but it's interesting because this implies G-Man was looking at more people than just Shepard, Freeman, and Calhoun. And speaking of them, there is a ton of Easter eggs nodding back to the original Half-Life and its expansions. Even an Easter egg nodding back to Half-Life Decay.
Get back where you belong and forget about all this. Until we meet again.
Gameplay is surprisingly interesting because even though for the most part it plays like Half-Life 1 would, giving you bigger and better guns as you go along and introducing better and harder enemies as you continue on throughout the game, it does do one thing that stands out as different from the original game. Now, Half-Life 1 does delve into kind of survival horror type elements, but it never really fully goes into this. Well, this mod sort of does, but not in a survival horror way. Instead, it took the horror in a more thriller vibe, similar to what you would see in, say, the original Alien movie. Actually, very similar to that. You're put into claustrophobic areas without too much way to defend yourself, and you know there are enemies looming nearby, but you don't really know where. The most memorable section for vast majority of you will probably be the section with Mr. Friendly. Mr. Friendly is a cut NPC for Half-Life 1 that never made it into the final game. Let's just say its method of killing involves basically raping someone to death. Yeah, that was the whole design behind that character. I don't have a better way to describe that, but I really want to put some attention to this part of the game right here.
I think you got company. Someone help! No, not again! Hey, over here! Eat lead, you outer space octopus!
Knowing the backstory of this cut NPC makes that line so much worse. Not again, what happened to you? Do you need to see a psychiatrist? Now I really want to emphasize, this is more like the original Alien movie, instead of something like your generic survival horror video game. I despise those types of video games, but this one does something that feels different than that. Near the whole first half of the game is dedicated to this sort of vibe and atmosphere, and it does it very well. I was never really particularly scared by it, but I immediately knew what they were going for, and you can get into the game and really kind of pick up on it. Now this idea for a mod is actually quite scary. If you don't get this right, it doesn't come across as threatening in any way or even immersive. It's hard to get into. And even worse, it could be not tested well at all, leaving the player stuck, frustrated, and annoyed. Thankfully, this mod doesn't come across any of these problems. In fact, it feels like one of the most play-tested mods I've ever played. The only times the entire game I got stuck were on a few puzzles. And those puzzles didn't give me the feeling of how am I supposed to figure that out. Instead, I figured out what I was supposed to do relatively quickly, and when I did get stuck, it was because I just saw something earlier and it didn't quite click with me yet. And when it did click, it felt pretty good. For example, I came across an explosive box. Naturally, you assume, well, it's an explosive box, I had to blow something up to continue. But I didn't have any guns at the moment, so how was I supposed to blow it up? For a moment I thought maybe I didn't pick up a gun earlier, but instead I realized, oh, I'm supposed to just jump on this box to continue. But then I figured out there's 2 explosive boxes in the next room that I have to use to blow something up. And I need 3 explosives to blow up what I'm supposed to blow up. Alright, so I gotta go back and get this explosive box, push it onto an elevator, and push it into the next room. It took an extra moment for me to realize I needed that explosive box and that there's supposed to be 3 explosives, but when it clicked it felt pretty good. It wasn't overly complicated or convoluted, and there's no way someone is supposed to say, well, how am I supposed to figure that out? But it will make you stop just a moment to change up the pacing. And this is what I mean. Puzzles are pretty difficult, because players honestly can be really dumb. They just don't pay attention and they don't look the correct direction, particularly up or down. But this mod always does a very good job making you look the correct direction. Even with very subtle things. That thing I had to blow up, well, there were 3 lights on top of what I had to blow up, and they changed different color with each explosion that happened. So I knew I needed 3 things, and that's why it clicked in my head. As for the combat itself, it doesn't feel particularly any different from the original Half-Life 1, aside from a few new enemies here and there, but it does feel very play-tested. It doesn't feel too easy or too difficult, and each combat arena feels very fun to fight in. They give you plenty of space to move around, and it's not just shooting down a corridor like a lot of Half-Life mods. And I really want to emphasize this fact. It's play-tested extremely well. You won't get stuck virtually anywhere, and the game won't feel frustrating because you're getting stuck trying to figure out how you're supposed to get by an enemy that's chasing you. There are a lot of scripted sequences in this game, but the game is so play-tested that they don't feel scripted. For example, a Gargantua will be chasing you throughout a lot of the game, and generally you will have to get by it or get away from it. But I never got killed by the Gargantua feeling like I didn't know what I was supposed to do or where I was supposed to run away to. You had to do something to get away, and there was a sense of urgency, but it wasn't an interactive cutscene, and it didn't feel like it was being too indescriptive so that you just died over and over. In fact, my only real complaint with this mod is just the guns themselves. The guns are the same guns we've already used in the original Half-Life, except you're forced to use the HD models. I hate the HD models. I don't want to use an M9 when the original was a Glock. I don't want to have to use an M16 when the original was an MP5, which, again, doesn't make sense. How does Glock share ammo with an M16? It's a 9mm compared to a 5.56. A lot of the gun sound effects have been changed, however, and most of them do sound better. That said, they changed the sound effect to the HD shotgun model, which was the only good thing about the HD models. I don't know why they did that. I mean, it doesn't sound terrible, just the original one sounded great, and you changed the only good thing about the HD models and then forced us to use the HD models. I personally myself would have been happier if all the guns were just changed entirely into new guns. That would have got my interest a lot more. But I guess I'm nitpicking here because if they do everything else so well and you already have a good gun sandbox, you don't need to change anything. I would just like a little bit more variety and not be forced into the HD models. Regardless, this is the only complaint I have about the entire mod. The mod could legitimately be sold as a proper expansion to the original Half-Life 1. All they would need is a little bit of proper voice acting, and it would just be an expansion ready to be sold. The mod experience will last you about 2 to 3 hours depending on how slow or how fast you move, and that's pretty good for a mod. A lot of articles have already been written about this mod, but I didn't see a video review of this mod yet, so I figured I'd go ahead and do one. It's definitely worth downloading. If you already have Half-Life, there's no real buy-in. You just download the mod for free and enjoy yourself. It's 100% worth it, and I could almost consider it canon to Half-Life 1's lore. It's this good. That about sums up my review for Half-Life Echoes. Thank all you guys for watching. I'd like to give a quick shout out to my patrons over on Patreon. Here's their names right here. If you want to come join them, my Patreon is patreon.com/Jarek4. All that money goes right back to this channel so I can make more content for you guys, and it really helps me. There's also plenty of other places for you guys to see me and follow me if you want. I streamed this entire mod over to my Twitch, so if you want to go check out my Twitch, twitch.tv/Jarek4GamingDragon, and you can come watch me there and hang out.